Hi there folks, it's Ros from Books from My Bookshelf here, and good timing Tilly, it's Tilly as well, who always likes to help me presenting my videos. So I thought it was about time I did another in my series of A to Z of authors from my bookshelf. And what are you off to? Okay. We're still in the G section, so I'm now today going to be doing a video on one of my favourite historical fiction writers and one of the most prolific as well, and that's Philippa Gregory. And this is actually quite timely because she's got a new book coming out next month called The Boleyn Traitor. So it's one of the Tudor books. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'll talk a bit about that later when I go through her list of books. So, as usual, I'm going to start with a little bit of biography of Philippa Gregory. And off you go then. And when we get to her books, I will go through the very long list of books that she has written. We'll finish off her biography, and then I will go through in a little bit more detail the 11 books that I have of Philippa Gregory's. So that's quite a lot to get through. So if you are a fan of historical fiction and or a fan of Philippa Gregory, sit tight, get a cup of tea, and let's make a start. Philippa Gregory was born on the 9th of January 1954, and I was interested to read that she was actually born in Nairobi in Kenya, and her father was Arthur Percy Gregory, who was working there as a radio operator and navigator for East African Airways, and her mother was Elaine Wedd. But when she was 2 years old, the family moved to England and they lived in Bristol. Now, not surprisingly, at school, she when she did her A-levels, she did English and history, and after she left school, she went into journalism for a while, as many writers do. She then started a degree course in literature at the University of Sussex. She switched it to a history degree, and she achieved a BA degree in history in 1982. She worked for the BBC Radio for 2 years, and then she attended the University of Edinburgh, where she obtained a PhD in 18th century literature in 1985. Now, while she was doing that PhD, she started to write her first novel. That novel was published in 1987, and that was Wideacre. Before I go on to her list of books, I just want to tell you how I came to read Wideacre in that very year, 1987. So in that year, I was 28. I was an out-of-work actress. To earn money, I used to do a lot of secretarial temping. One of the best jobs that I ever had was working for 2 weeks as a receptionist at Penguin Books. I don't know why, it was just, I just really enjoyed that job. I picked up a lot of phone calls, greeted a lot of people, probably lots of authors. I can't remember who they were now, but it was just a great job that I had for 2 weeks. And one of the perks of working for a publisher, or Penguin Books anyway, was getting free books, because what happens with publishers when they publish a book, particularly if a new author who they don't know is whether they're going to do well or not, they will print a certain amount, and any overprints go into a pulp pile. And being an employee of Penguin books, we were allowed to pick up any books from the pulp file and keep them for free. And that is how I got my copy of Wideacre. This, believe it or not, was on the pulp pile. So I really got to read Philippa Gregory's very first book, probably one of the very first readers, and I couldn't put it down, but I'll go into more detail about the book later. Glad to know that I was one of Philippa Gregory's first readers, and I've read many of her books since. I've always been a sort of a lifelong fan of hers, and I'm pretty sure that from that moment on, her books were very, very rarely in the pulp pile. She's just one of the best known and best loved historical fiction writers that we have today. Now, I'm just going to go through a list of her books. They are many, but they're usually I give a list of books in chronological order of publication. These are more or less, but they're also in order of the series or types of books, because they're quite distinctive. So it's kind of better to read them in that way. So starting with Wideacre, and of course Wideacre was the first in a trilogy. So that was 1987, and then the second book in the trilogy was The Favoured Child, and that was published in 1989, followed by Meridon, which was in 1990. Then there's another series called the Tradescent series, which I haven't read, and that was Earthly Joys, published in 1998, and Virgin Earth, published in 1999. I don't know anything about those books, so if you have read those, do let me know. And then we have the long list of the Plantagenet and Tudor novels, which are her best known books, starting of course with The Other Boleyn Girl, published in 2001, and followed by The Queen's Fool in 2003, The Virgin's Lover in 2004, The Constant Princess in 2005, The Boleyn Inheritance in 2006, The Other Queen in 2008, The White Queen in 2009, The Red Queen in 2010, The Lady of the Rivers 2011, The Kingmaker's Daughter 2012, The White Princess in 2013, The King's Curse in 2014, The Taming of the Queen in 2015, Three Sisters, Three Queens 2016, and The Last Tudor in 2017, and then the next book that is coming out next month, October 2025, will be The Boleyn Traitor. Can't wait for that. Then we have a couple more series. We've got another series I haven't read at all. It's the Order of Darkness series, and these are Changeling in 2012, Stormbringers in 2013, Fool's Gold in 2014, and Dark Tracks in 2018. These sound really interesting. I don't know much about this series. Do let me know if you've read those. And then, of course, we have the Fairmile series, which is fairly recent, of which I've read all of these. And these were Tidelands in 2019, Dark Tides in 2020, and Dawnlands in 2022. There are also a few standalone books, obviously not part of any series. And these are Mrs. Hartley and the Growth Centre, or otherwise known as Alice Hartley's Happiness, in 1992. The Wise Woman, also in 1992. Fallen Skies in 1994, which I have a copy of. A Respectable Trade in 1995. Perfectly Correct in 1996, The Little House in 1998, and Zelda's Cut in 2000. There's also a collection of short stories called Bread and Chocolate, published in 2000. And she also has done some children's books. There's a series called the Princess Florezella series, which consists of Princess Florezella, published in 1988, so very early on too. Then Florezella and the Wolves in 1991, and Florezella and the Giant in 1992, and then 3 children's standalones, Diggory and the Boa Conductor, 1996, which is a picture book, The Little Pet Dragon, 1997, also a picture book, and A Pirate Story, 1999, again a picture book. There's also a play called Richard My Richard, which was published in 2024. And she has also written 3 non-fiction books. And of course, she's an expert on women's history. And these non-fiction books are The Women of the Cousins' War, The Duchess, the Queen and the King's Mother, published in 2011 and written with David Baldwin and Michael Jones. Then there's Early Women Writers in the Women Writers Handbook in 2020. And then Normal Women, 900 Years of Making History, published in 2023. That's a list. Now, her books have sparked off some controversies in the world of academic history. Some historians have criticised her for the blurring of history and fiction, and for the portrayal of some of the historical figures. I think the suggestion is that it leads people to have a wrong possible idea of a certain person in history or certain events in history. My view on this, as I've written historical fiction myself, my view of this is, for one thing, I think most readers of historical fiction are intelligent enough to understand the difference between the historical background in historical fiction and the imagination of the writer, who imagines what might have happened, and even that what might have happened, when it's from a writer as well researched in history as Philippa Gregory is, she's going to have a lot of circumstantial evidence, maybe, but there's going to be a lot of background research that backs that up. And of course, we don't know. We don't know what people said. We don't know exactly what their characters might have been. We don't know what went on behind closed doors. Of course, it's all imagination and fiction. At the end of the day, it is fiction. The clue is in the naming of the genre. It's historical fiction. But the history, the background, the actual historical events are all sound, especially somebody like Philippa Gregory, who is an absolute expert in her historical knowledge, and especially her historical knowledge of women in history. And I know, for me, when I'm writing historical fiction or historical chapters in my multi-timeline books, I'm stopping all the time to check up what it must have been like to do certain things at a certain time, what people might have eaten, what clothes they would have worn, what kind of technology was available, all those things, constantly checking up. And of course, I am sure I get it wrong sometimes. But as I said at the beginning of this little rant, I actually think that most readers of historical fiction are intelligent enough to understand all that. What I hate is when I read historical fiction where the background history is just ridiculous. And I've been known to almost throw books across the room, because the history is silly. So yeah, but somebody like Philippa Gregory, who is very well researched in history, while the characters may be imagined to a large extent, we know that the historical background is going to be sound. And not only all of that, but many people, including myself, have become interested in history as a subject through reading historical fiction. And particularly Philippa Gregory's novels that have inspired many people to look into the history that she was writing about. So there we go. That's the end of rant on the controversies over historical fiction. Perhaps I'll do a whole video on just on the genre of historical fiction at some point. Anyway, to continue, despite all that, despite all some of the criticism that she has had, she is also recognised as an authority on women's history, and she holds honorary degrees in that subject from several universities. And she was also presented with the Outstanding Historical Fiction Award by the Historical Writers Association in 2018. And she also, interestingly, she runs a charity called Gardens for the Gambia, which raises funds for wells in schools where children learn to grow food in gardens watered by these wells provided by this charity. So that's a very interesting and laudable little sideline that she runs. There is not much available. Obviously, being, she's only a few years older than I am, so very much still with us and still writing, and I'm sure many books yet to come. So there's not a lot written about her more private life, so I'll leave that be for now. And let's dip into some of the books that I have read of hers. Many of her books are really very much focused on women in history, and whether that's an actual known historical figure, as mostly in the Tudor and Plantagenet novels, and sometimes completely fictional characters. And of course, her first book was this completely fictional character, the character of Beatrice Lacey in Wideacre. Wow. What can I say about this? One of the reviews for it says that the character of Beatrice Lacey knocks Scarlett O'Hara into short cotton socks. She is really an anti-hero. She is wicked. But the background of this character is, of course, in the 18th century, where this woman grows up in a house that she loves. And although she's the oldest child, of course, because she's female, she is not allowed to inherit. But her brother will, and she knows that he has no real love of the place as she does. So she sets out to make sure that she keeps hold of this house, whatever the means. And so I like this, one of the sort of descriptions of the book on the back, part of the blurb is, corrupted by a world that mistreats women, she sets out to corrupt others. Sexual and willful, she believes that the only way to achieve control over Wideacre is through a series of horrible crimes, and no one escapes the consequences of her need to possess the land. So there is this kind of premise that it's the unfair treatment of women that has created this monster of a character. She is so compelling to read. And of course, too, there is a lot of sex and there's incest in this book too. As I say, she really does stop at nothing to achieve what she wants. And the Mail on Sunday said her vivid tale of murder, intrigue, and incest in 18th century Sussex. Wideacre isn't just a bodice ripper, but a gripping novel about power and possession. It's such a powerful novel, and I remember when I read this, she was a completely new author. Of course, I knew nobody knew anything about her, and as I picked this up out of the pulp pile, and I was absolutely compelled to read. Found it really, really difficult to put down. It's very interesting, isn't it, when there are novels where the main character really carries out some, what we might say, evil deeds, and yet we cannot help reading about her and what is she going to do next. And at the same time we totally get that injustice of her not being able to inherit. So yeah, I just loved it when I read it. I don't know how well it stood the test of time, but I certainly remember it being a very good read. And since then, I've been a huge fan of Philippa Gregory's. Wideacre books are a trilogy, and although I really, really loved Wideacre, it wasn't till quite a few years later that I read the second one in the trilogy, and I have to admit I've never read the third. The second one is The Favoured Child, where the main character is the daughter of Beatrice Lacey. And I think really I've never gone on to read the third one because this one didn't grab me as much as Wideacre did. I felt it was trying to relive the passion, the power, and the dark side of Wideacre, but maybe it wasn't quite as thrilling and compelling as the first one. So I can't really, again, I find that when a book hasn't really grabbed me that much, I don't remember the plot so well, which I suppose it makes sense. So she's the daughter of Beatrice. Julia Lacey becomes the heiress of Wideacre, was very, very good with the land, was able to call forth, as it says in the back, wheat-rich harvests from the ruined earth, and had blinding visions of the future. But she gets entangled in a passionate rivalry between her cousin Richard and the man she loves. So we fall into this controversy here, this divided loyalties. But it's really difficult to talk about this book because I just cannot remember much detail from it. And yeah, I remember Wideacre really, really well. So yeah, as I say, didn't grab me as much. So I've never gone on to read the third. But do let me know what you thought of the rest of the Wideacre trilogy, because I'd be interested to know. Now, one of her books I have read, but I don't seem to have a copy, so it must have been a borrowed one, is The Other Boleyn Girl. And that came out in 2001. And The Other Boleyn Girl is about Anne Boleyn's sister, Mary. And she actually was Henry VIII's mistress before he kind of dropped her and started looking at her sister as the potential next queen. But of course, the idea of The Other Boleyn Girl is that while Mary was okay with being his mistress, Anne held out and she wanted marriage. That's what I remember about The Other Boleyn Girl. It was also made into a film. I think it was a film, wasn't it, rather than the television series. I'll have to look that up. In fact, there was sort of both. There was a television film in 2003 and a feature film in 2008 starring Scarlett Johansson as Mary and Natalie Portman as Anne. And I love the idea of basing a novel on the sister of such a well-known historical figure such as Anne Boleyn and her experiences with Henry VIII and her treatment as a kind of pawn in politics, etc. So it was really fascinating read, I found. Now, the next book on the list of hers that I have read is The Queen's Fool, which was published in 2003. And this time, although it's one of the Tudor books, the main character in this is fictional, but it's based on the historical fact that there was, in fact, a female jester in the royal court at that time. Nobody knows much about her. She's referred to in some historical document, but obviously Philippa Gregory took this little piece of information and turned her into a main character. The name that she has in the book is Hannah Green. She starts out very, very young. She has some sort of second sight and also has escaped to England from Spain, where her mother was burnt at the stake for being Jewish. She's discovered by real historical figures such as Robert Dudley and John Dee, and it's decided that she should be a fool for Edward VI. Edward VI, of course, was Henry VIII's son and heir, who reigned for a short period until his death at a very early age. And while she is in the service of Edward VI, he asks her to go and spy on his sister Mary, who is his natural heir to the throne. And she goes into the Princess Mary's court and discovers she's a very different character to what she thought she was going to be. But of course, Hannah is living in a very dangerous time, and she is caught between these two sort of rival siblings in this family, and has to find her way with her divided loyalties. So yes, I know I've read this, but I don't remember much about it, so it obviously hasn't stuck with me in the way some other of Gregory's work has, but it's an intriguing premise all the same. I think Philippa Gregory always has a way of looking at history through different eyes than the normal way we've seen it, so that's quite an intriguing premise right there. Now, the next one I've read from this list is this one. It's The Other Queen. And this one has the main character of Mary, Queen of Scots. And it's the whole novel is set during the time of Mary's imprisonment in England by her cousin, Queen Elizabeth I. You might or might not know that the history, that's the background of this novel. So Mary was a huge threat to Elizabeth I. With Elizabeth not marrying and there being no heir, of course, Mary was next in line and could so easily have possibly overthrown her. So Elizabeth could never be certain that Mary was going to be loyal to her. And although Elizabeth promises Mary sanctuary in England, she actually finds herself imprisoned, and it's all about that period. I have a dog here who wants to come and say hello. Come on then. There we go. All right. Yes, lick the book. That's it. And also it's about the plot while she is in prison, and the two people who are charged with keeping her One of them is Bess of Hardwick. And by the way, if you are interested in really strong women in history, then look up Bess of Hardwick. She was the most amazing character in history. And also do visit Hardwick Hall if you're ever in, I think it's Leicestershire, Derbyshire, sort of around that area. Can't remember exactly. But that's an amazing place. Bess of Hardwick was an amazing woman, and she is one of the characters in this novel. And so you're trying to read it. So, of course, these people who are having to keep Mary in prison, they're having to deal with this plot that arises to rescue Mary and to overthrow Queen Elizabeth. So it's all a lot of plotting, and we all know what happened to Mary, Queen of Scots, in the end. So no spoilers there, but it's that's an intriguing novel. I really did enjoy this one. The next book I have from this list is this one. It's the Red Queen. It's the Red Queen. You're not putting anything in front of my face. Okay, thank you, Till. The Red Queen is about Margaret Beaufort, the mother of Henry VII, who was the father of Henry VIII. So Philippa Gregory paints her as this both strongly religious woman, but also very, very strongly ambitious, with a very strong, powerful sense of destiny. And when she gives birth to her first son, Henry Tudor, she vows that one day he will become king. Oh, yes. And so, she's the one really that starts off the whole Tudor dynasty. She basically, one of those really strong mothers, she basically masterminds that whole series of events that lead to Henry Tudor becoming King of England, and plots against the York family, who also have the strong claims to the throne. So, really fascinating. Again, she's using as a main character one of those female figures in history who are actually very, very important, but we don't always get to hear about that much. But yes, she is the mother of Henry Tudor, who basically, I think without her, we may never have had the Tudors, Henry VII, Henry VIII, and his 3 children as the Tudor monarchs. So amazing story, that, and I really enjoyed that one. The next one I have from the list is The Kingmaker's Daughter. Now, this one is part of the Plantagenet series of books, and it's about Anne Neville. So, one of the most powerful families of this period. She is the daughter of the man known as the Kingmaker, the very, very powerful Earl of Warwick, and of course part of that big Plantagenet family. And it's about it's about ambition and the desire for the throne. And it's about the ups and downs of this family. Where at first Anne is married off to Edward IV, but she is widowed by the age of 14. Her father also dead, and that's when her family fall into bad times. Her mother locked away, and she becomes an enemy of her sister. And it is around that time then that she is courted by the Duke of Gloucester, who is to become the future Richard III. So what a fascinating story in this very, very turbulent time in British history, during the rivalry between the Lancastrians and the Yorkists. And it's always a really fascinating period. And of course, Anne, finds herself with many enemies, and not knowing who to trust, and even can she trust her husband, Richard III. And it's just, whatever, we don't know, what Anne Neville's character was really like, but the whole book, it's just a fascinating story of the lives of women coming from those kind of noble families and what their lives were really like, married off to powerful people, often at the age of around 13, and having children at such an early age as well, and caught up in ambition and rivalries, just makes really compelling reading. So again, I enjoyed this one, The Kingmaker's Daughter. And the next one I read quite a few years ago now is The Taming of the Queen. And I think of all her Tudor books, this one is actually my favourite. The Taming of the Queen is about Henry VIII's sixth and last wife, Catherine Parr. It's a fascinating exploration of this woman's character. Of course, when you are asked to marry Henry VIII, you don't say no, despite what you know to be a really dangerous place to be. And we know too that she was in love with Thomas Seymour at the time, but she did not really have any choice to turn Henry VIII down. And of course, the fact that she has already got a lover is a dangerous thing in itself. We know what happens when Henry accuses his wives of adultery. And also, I loved how Philippa Gregory paints Catherine Parr in this book. This highly intelligent woman and an independent woman with very much a mind of her own. And she was, that is not just from Philippa Gregory's imagination. We know that Catherine Parr was one of the first women, not the first woman, to publish under her own name. She had already written a book called Psalms or Prayers anonymously. But her second book, which was Prayers or Meditations, she actually published under her own name, which is an amazing thing for a woman at that time. And she also, when Henry VIII was away in France, he appointed her as regent. So she was very much a ruler in those temporary times when he was away. But her life was dangerous, not just because of this secret that she had, but she was very, very strongly Protestant. And there were many who plotted against her and tried to turn the king against her. And so this is very much the story of how this woman navigates through this marriage to one of the most notorious tyrants in English history, and a really interesting character study, really, of her. So I really did enjoy this one, and I just found her portrayal of Catherine Parr just really interesting, and yes, based on proper researched history. So I really recommend this one. Those are all of the Tudor and Plantagenet ones I've read, and I still want to read more of those, definitely. But one of the standalone books I've read is this one. It's called Fallen Skies. It's very, very different to a lot of her other historical books, which are set very much centuries ago. But this one is set in the early 20th century, between the wars. Well, it's just after the First World War. And the woman's name is Lily Valance, who just wants to enjoy the world of the 1920s. Then she becomes very attractive to Captain Stephen Winters, who was a hero of the First World War. She's attracted to his wealth and status. He, in her, sees someone who can take him away from the nightmares he has from the battle at Flanders Plains, where he lost so many of his comrades. But their two needs don't really match up in the end. She wants to continue a career in singing. He wants a stay-at-home wife, and that is basically the premise. Again, it's one of those books that I haven't quite remembered very well at all. Certainly didn't grab me as much as her earlier historical books, but certainly worth giving it a go if you're interested in that period in history. Now, coming right up to date with the last set of books I read of Philippa Gregory's, and that is the Fairmile trilogy. So starting with Tidelands, and then Dark Tides, and Dawnlands. I really enjoyed this trilogy. Again, it's a slightly different period to most of her other books. This is set in the 17th century. It starts off when the country is still in a civil war, with King Charles II in exile, and that war is kind of coming to an end. And there's this wonderful character of Eleanor, who lives on the edge of the land on the south coast in a very sort of low status life, in his poorly cottage in this place where the shifting tides make it very dangerous to move around. And when she meets James, who she kind of rescues as he has lost his way, he is a man of status. And at a time where Oliver Cromwell's troops are becoming victorious, she finds that James turns out to be a Catholic spy. They, however, fall in love, and it's a fascinating tale of survival. And of course, because Eleanor is also a healer, it's that period where there is danger of being accused of witchcraft. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this novel, and it has a very thrilling ending too. And the next in the trilogy, Dark Tides, is much, much later on, when Eleanor and her children have escaped from that parish, and they've built a life on the banks of the River Thames, on the edge of London, with a warehouse business. And in this book, we first of all hear that Eleanor's son, who went to Italy, is dead, but Eleanor doesn't believe that he is dead. And another part of this book, which is a really interesting part of this book, is that Eleanor's brother has gone to live in America, in New England. He was a very strong supporter of Cromwell, but he then finds himself caught between the suspicions of the settlers there against the Native Americans, but he also himself befriends these natives as well. So he finds himself caught between two communities there. And meantime, back in England, Rob's wife, Livia, arrives from Venice, and she's an interesting character and she really stirs up trouble. But Eleanor's daughter also travels to Italy to see if she can find out what happened to Rob. So there's a lot going on in that one too. It makes fascinating reading. And the third in the trilogy is Dawnlands. Again, a bit later, we come back to James again. He turns up in this because Livia, this very, very manipulative woman, also manipulates her way into his life, and Eleanor's brother, Ned, decides to return to England, but on his way he rescues a Native American who has been enslaved and brings him back to England. But that doesn't kind of end well there, and he has to go and find him again. I won't go too much into that. But the fortunes of Eleanor's family really very much on the up in this novel. I have to say, and somebody's mentioned this quite recently, it doesn't have, for the last in the trilogy, it doesn't have the most satisfactory of endings. And some people have found that very disappointing. I get that. But Philippa Gregory's a bit like that. She doesn't really always do the expected. And I did think that she left it open, maybe on purpose, and possibly she might write a fourth one in this series. I don't know. I don't know whether she just left it a bit like that to say, well, that, nothing ends all wrapped up in a pink ribbon always, does it? I don't know. It was a very strange ending. Well, I did enjoy the whole series. I did think, gosh, I hope maybe she does write a fourth one and wraps this all up. But who knows? Maybe she won't. But there we go. I do recommend the trilogy all the same. It's a fascinating tale, lots of stuff going on. And, as again, a fascinating view of that period in history from the Civil War and right up to the Monmouth Uprising, of course, that Ned gets involved in as well. So there we go. That's that. And that's all of the ones I have read of Philippa Gregory. Now, of course, the next one coming out, let's just have a look at that. So I'm just looking up, I've just gone to Philippa Gregory's official website to look at the next book that comes out in October 2025 called The Boleyn, it's just called Boleyn Traitor. So I'll just read the blurb here. She survives 4 queens. Will she fall to a tyrant? Jane Boleyn watches from the shadows of the Tudor court, where nothing is more powerful than a secret or more deadly. As the Boleyns rise, Jane rises with them, but the king's love is a fickle thing, and when the royal gaze turns elsewhere, Jane uses the only weapon she has, her voice. To survive in this dazzling, dangerous world, she has mastered many masks, loving wife, devoted sister, and obedient spy. Now she must step out of the shadows. She might outlive her rivals. She might know the court's darkest secrets, but power rests on the edge of a tyrant king's sword. Where will it fall next? Gosh, that sounds really intriguing. So Jane Boleyn was Anne Boleyn's sister-in-law. She was married to Anne's brother, George Boleyn, I believe, who later became Viscount Rochford. So that's who that story will be about. So I'll be looking out to pick up a copy of that one. Right, it's nearly dinner time, isn't it? Shall we just wrap up first? Yeah? Can you just wait for that long? So there we go. A really prolific historical fiction writer, Philippa Gregory. I will always pick up her books when I see them. And, as I say, with some of the books, they don't always grab me. but most of them do, and I generally find them absolutely fascinating. And I think it's her expertise in and her knowledge of women's history that really shines out from all of these books, where she very much concentrates on women in history, not always known historical figures, but fictional ones as well as, the ordinary people as well, such as Eleanor in the Fairmile trilogy. Yeah, I will feed you in a minute. So there we go. I hope you enjoyed that. Of course, do look out for her next one coming out next month. I hope next week I should be able to review what I'm reading. I'm reading one of the Harry Potter books, the Goblet of Fire. You can see just about 2/3 of the way through, so I should have finished it by next week, I hope. So I'll be reviewing that. And in October, of course, there'll be a few videos, including a Halloween video, but also what I plan to do is to upload over 3 weeks my narration of Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in the 3 weeks leading up to Halloween. So that's all to come. So make sure you're yes, all right. Yeah, make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to see another in my A to Z series, then I'll put a link to one of them up here. And in the meantime, have a good week, everybody, and I will see you all again soon. Bye for now.